Hey guys, this is John, and I'm playing Maxpayne777 in a 15 plus 10 game on chess.com. 1775, he opens with d4. Okay, let's play d6 against this move. I'm in the mood to mix it up tonight. Playing chess close to midnight once again. Thanks to all of those who watched the couple of April Fool's videos that I put out the other day. It was a lot of fun. No, I'm not advocating playing the Bond Cloud, at least if you care about your results. Fun to play every once in a while, right? And also hope you guys got a kick out of that Danny Wrench video. Should I play e5 or g6? I often play both of these lines. Let's play for e5. I'm going to play directly in the center. f3 is a way to defend the e4 pawn. Is not nearly as common as knight c3. So I think e5 is appropriate. And white can play d5 and take some center space, but potentially leave this diagonal open. It'd be nice if I could put my bishop out on c5 then, but obviously not possible to do that. Okay, so white maintains the tension here, knight e2. Considering knight c6 here, g6. I'm already out of my opening book. Sometimes in these situations, you can even consider playing some sort of quick strike in the center. So some sort of d5 push. I'm going to take a moment just to weigh my options. I don't think I want to take on d4 yet. That seems a little accommodating. But definitely knight c6 and g6, or even bishop e7, moves that all come to mind. I think white's going to develop like this, more or less like a same-ish King's Indian, but without the pawn on c4 yet. So if that's the case, how might I want to play? Knight bd7, also possible. This is a very flexible position. I mean, I think there's probably 4 different or more acceptable moves for black here. c5, trying to force some sort of resolution in the center, looks a bit premature. Even moves like knight h5 come to mind here, as strange as that looks. I think I'm going to play knight c6. Let's just see what white does against this. I'm expecting bishop e3. But I'm sort of drawn to this idea of trying to force through d5 in the middle of the board. Okay, so white plays d5. Now I could play back to b8 or to e7 and try to recycle the knight over here to the king side. Going back to b8 seems ridiculous, moving the knight twice. Just put it back on its original square, but I might be able to take up residence here. That said, though, I think I'm going to go to e7 and then over to g6. This seems a bit more coherent to me. I also sometimes play these systems as white with knight e2. And it's nice because you get to use the f-pawn, even though I have said many times that the f-pawn stands for forget about it, and generally you should not move your f-pawn early in the game. With this setup, white does reinforce e4. The position in the center has not opened up, so it is acceptable to do that. Okay, bishop here. Now, I think knight g6, and I can look to play h6. I don't think I want to allow this, although it's actually debatable if white would even take on f6. If I were to push h6, would white even do that? Because that gives up white's control of the dark squares in the future. So h6, trade, and then h5, put the bishop on h6 and try to exert some pressure down this diagonal. That would actually be pretty interesting, but knight g6 just looks like a standard decision here. So I'm going to play that. I've already burned a little time, especially on move 4. Spent over a minute. So I'm just going to play a simple looking move and look to follow with h6 when I'm going to have the option of queen takes. So yeah, once again, thanks for playing along with those April Fool's videos. I think I got more of you guys last year, actually, when I was at that tournament in Charlotte, and I was talking about gradually shifting my content towards grooming and fashion and dating advice style videos. I even got my own mother last year, actually, with that video. So that was a highly successful April Fool's. This one was too, though. Glad to get a video in on the Bond Cloud. Yeah, I think white's bishop is going to be a bit misplaced on g5. I mean, assuming I play h6 in the near future, I think white should retreat back to e3. I mean, it's just too valuable of a piece to trade. White could play c4 and really make this like a same-ish if they want. h6, bishop e3. And then, as usual, I'm going to try and start playing on the king side. Maybe bishop e7, castles, move this knight, and try to play for f5. Okay, so queen d2. Considering a couple things here. Again, h6, definitely playable. Bishop e7, maybe to threaten this, is an option. Although if white plays knight c3, I don't really see what I've gained. So it's between h6 and bishop e7. Yeah, I'm not going to be fianchettoing the bishop anymore, so bishop e7 seems to make sense. Yeah, let's play bishop e7. The dual threats of the discoveries on the bishop on g5 are kind of interesting here. So knight takes d5 is probably the cleaner way to win a pawn if I get the chance, which I just noticed now that I can play even against knight c3. So white may be advised to play bishop e3 right now. And then I will have induced bishop e3 without having to play h6. Which, you know, I don't think h6 hurt me or anything. In fact, it might even be prove useful if I could drop the knight back here. Okay, h4, but h4 also is kind of weakening. So that does take the sting out of this or this. White could just take my knight in those cases, but now when I play h6, white must part with that dark square bishop. Let's say h6, bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, h5. I can dive into f4. Yeah, and I'm gonna go for that because I see no downside to playing this way. White might go back to e3, but I'm pretty happy to have induced some weaknesses, potential weaknesses on the king side. Maybe another move I could have considered was knight h5. But we'll see what white does here. On bishop e3, I may play knight h5 anyways to attack this pawn multiple times. Yeah, white does retain this bishop, which I was kind of saying all along is probably what white should do. So it would be interesting to do this now. Here, and if g3, probably a bit too much to play knight takes g3. I don't think that's going to be working. Knight h5, g3, and then f5, take, bishop takes, g4. That's getting complicated. Knight takes on h4. Something about that feels... well, I don't know how to feel about that, to be honest. Yeah, knight h5 is interesting here. Definitely achieved an original position. Can safely say that. Yeah, maybe it would have been better to play knight h5 on the previous move, even though h6 seemed automatic to me. If I don't move this knight and allow white to play h5, is that really so bad? I mean, I can always just go back to f8. That's probably actually fine. So therefore, I'm considering a move like c6 if I want to open up a second front on the queen side. c5 even. Because I think white's going to be castling queenside now. So maybe if I can start getting some pawns up there, that will be an interesting way to begin playing on that wing. I mean, I could play knight h5, and if bishop here, maybe then c5. Perhaps that is a line worth exploring. Then I am inviting white to play g4. Could also just play h5 here, but I have mixed feelings about h5. It does allow this back into the g5 square. Yeah, a lot to calculate here. A lot to take in. Really just trying to weigh right now how much this h5 move is going to affect the game if white's allowed to play that. I mean, I kind of think I shouldn't allow that, but I'm not thrilled about knight h5 for some reason. Okay, you know what? I'm going to play pawn h5. It wasn't my first instinct move, but given that I have a little bit more time in this game, I can afford to think on this move, although 3 minutes is a lot. But at least now I know what's going to be happening on the king side, more or less. Like, I'm going to be preventing white from expanding any further. This pawn could remain a weakness, but look for me to perhaps switch the play over to the queen side if I can. I still won't give up on ideas of attacking h4 or maybe even jumping a knight into f4. But I think getting in c5 could be interesting too. Not clear yet where to put my light square bishop. It might go to d7 and support a b5 push, especially if white castles queenside, but up in the air at the moment. So this is the Pyrrhot's Defense Lion's Jaw variation. All right. Learning something new. Yeah, if we back up and move here, I kind of think I should have given knight h5 more thought in this position. Unclear if it actually even threatens much, but I wish I would have thought about that move a bit more. As played, I have forced white's bishop back and fixed this as a potential weakness here. So I'm still relatively happy with my position. So knight c3, I think I'm going to play c5. I'm not fearing an en passant capture. d6 is well guarded. Unlike a King's Indian, I was mentioning the King's Indian because it has some similarities, but unlike a King's Indian, my d6 pawn should be better defended. Okay, I'm going to play this right away because, again, I burned a lot of time on the previous move, so let's just play this immediately. So if white takes en passant, I'm not as upset as I might be in a King's Indian because d6, let's say white castles this way, d6 is reinforced. And I think this move is going to make white think twice about castling this way, because if I can just play bishop d7, b5, b4, I have the makings of a pawn storm. And for white, comparatively, getting in g4 is going to be a lot tougher. Also, presumably, white's going to be moving this knight so they can develop this bishop, or playing g3 and potentially getting the bishop to g2 or h3. But that is one issue with developing the knight through e2 in this line. You get this logjam of minor pieces. You get the f-pawn up there for further protection of the center, but there's some logjam going on, and it takes a little bit longer to coordinate as opposed to just putting the knight on the natural square f3. By the way, c6 was also, I think, quite a valid move. I was not quite sure if I want to take here, although, yeah, again, another idea in hindsight, maybe I should have spent more time on taking and knight takes, queen takes, eventually getting the bishop out to e6. Looks a lot like a Sicilian in that case. Okay, so g3, solid move. Thinking about bishop d7, looking for b5. Probably don't want to play b5 directly. Doesn't seem like I get compensation if this happens. Could play a6, but I think white's going to play a4. White might play a4 anyways. Let's just play bishop d7, though. I don't see anything wrong with this move. As of now, white has more space than I do. I have control of some nice squares like d4, but white's pawn chain is extending a bit further into my position. That said, though, I'm relatively free of weaknesses, and I have some nice potential play, like I said, with b5. And a4 would be a very normal reaction here. And I'd like to get a6, b5 in, but it may take some preparation because a4, a6, white does have a5. So white can take en passant if I push b6 or b5. b5, that is. Usually you want to wait and try to prepare that break a little bit more. So if white plays a4 here, I may actually play b6, a6, and then b5 to try to bypass the en passant option. So that's one thing I could try. I'm also just looking at my minor pieces, seeing if I can make sense of them a little bit more. I mean, I could just castle and try to move this knight and play for f5. Yep, and white does play a4. Castling is probably not half bad, because I have a feeling white's going to go for bishop g2. Bishop g2 and castles this way. I don't think white's going to be castling queenside, especially now that they played that move. So I don't need to directly try to play for this break. And the only other real pawn break I have at my disposal is f5. So maybe I should castle here. And then move this knight, let's say knight h7, and try to play for f5. I am somewhat giving up squares if I do that, and this knight on g6 isn't too happy anymore. That is a piece I've mentioned already a couple times, and I may need to improve it. I mean, I'm almost considering knight f8, g6, knight h7, and then f5 later with the help of the pawn. That looks kind of convoluted, though. No, I think I'm just going to castle. I'm going to castle and probably move this knight. Maybe knight e8, swing it around to c7, which can assist with the b5 break and also free up f5. That's probably a better route for the knight than bringing it to h7, where it's not even clear if it's doing anything. We might even have a knight h8 sighting in this game if I decide that that's the best square for my knight. We'll see. I'm certainly looking for pawn breaks because my position is a little bit more cramped, and I want to make use of my piece activity, potential piece activity. These pieces are waiting to be released. So I think if white plays here, knight e8 is what I'm leaning towards. Yeah, just double checking to see if white can do anything with these pawns. I don't think they're going to want to, though, because g4 would drop the h4 pawn after I play knight e8. f4, I can play f5, and I have a feeling those complications are probably pretty decent for me. I mean, it weakens the g4 square, too. So, yeah, not a whole lot else to consider. Let's do it. Knight e8. Again, borrowing a page from the King's Indian. This is a very common maneuver for black in the King's Indian. Dropping the knight back to free up the f-pawn. So on castles, do I continue knight e8 or do I go for f5? Key question. Gotta say I'm leaning towards f5. You know, I know I mentioned knight c7, which is going to help out b5, but let's say, I mean, one way to judge a plan is give yourself 2 or 3 moves to implement the plan without the opponent moving and see if that plan is still any good. So if I play knight c7 and then b5 and white just takes, so I've given myself 2 free moves and white just won. Knight c7, b5, and white takes. Does that even lead to an advantage for me? Because I could take with the knight, but we might have a trade. I mean, I guess I get my bishop out to b5. Probably white doesn't want to allow my knight to jump into d4. But I have an isolated a-pawn. I mean, the pressure down on that knight on e2 is probably negligible. I think I might be better off going for f5 and try to replant the knight on f6, or go for f4 and really try to break open white's king side here. White may be hesitating to castle because of possible sacrifices on h4. I'm not really seriously entertaining those yet, although they could be something to consider in the future. Oh, and white surprises me. Okay, white's going queenside. Interesting. Yeah, gotta say, I was not expecting that course of events. Now that white's played this. Okay, so this changes everything. Very important to say that straight away. So now I will definitely be going for b5. I'm even considering playing it right now as a sacrifice, although it's probably best to prepare it. And I could play b5, a takes b5, a6, I don't think I mind sacrificing a single pawn to open lines there. Knight c7. If I play a move like knight c7, though, now it becomes more likely that white's going to push on the other side of the board and try to create some trouble. So, yeah, I mean, when you have opposite side castling, it's not always the case that it becomes immediately sharp. And you're not always going to have just two sides trying to bludgeon each other, especially with their pawns and storming each other with their pawns. But I think in this position, that's probably the way it's going to go. Okay, so my candidate moves here. A6, knight c7, b5, maybe queen a5 to threaten bishop takes a4. Looks interesting as well. Don't like queen a5 as much, though, because b3 seems to be a decent defense. A6. I think I can deal with any attempts by white to do something over here. I mean, I'm pretty solid around my king. G4 still looks suspect because of this, although maybe white will just throw the kitchen sink at me. You never know. B5 is the most direct move, but I'm not sure about knight takes b5. Knight takes b5, a6, let's say. Yeah, I kind of think I need a bit more punch than that. Knight c7, I mean, yeah, a6 is the move I really want to play. I think I'm going to do it. And let's see, because white has to make a tough decision here. If they want to go g4, they got to give me the h-pawn, and they might do that. They might just decide, all right, sacrifice it, see what happens. I mean, maybe something like g4 takes rook over here. But it's going to take white several moves to, I think, set up any sort of threat. I might just take on g4 at that point. Okay, white plays for f4. And on this one, I think I have a few things I can do. I mean, I might just ignore this. I might continue with b5. And we're going to get that knight h8 sighting if that happens. f5, knight h8. And I'm actually looking snug as a bug in a rug there because there's no open lines yet. g4 I can take. Could also play the knight back to f6 here so that on f5 knight here, I'm ready to jump into g4 at a moment's notice. That is also kind of attractive. If I really want to keep lines closed, I don't really care about white taking on e5 because I can take with a knight, and that's just gorgeous if I get to take with the knight. So yeah, actually, you know, this move is pretty interesting. Although I wonder if I have to be aware of bishop takes c5. I should be aware of that. Knight f6. Let's just say hypothetically, f5, knight h8, bishop takes c5, d takes c5, and then there's this move d6, which could be annoying. So maybe I should go b5 directly. Yeah, I think I'm going to play b5 directly. We're on move 15 and nothing has been traded yet. Gotta love those type of games. Unless they're immediately locked up and you're already in a drawish position, but that's clearly not the case here. There's a lot of tension, lots of points of contact. Yeah, and white's main problem after f5 knight h8 is that it's very hard to force through lines in a good way, I think. I mean, maybe g4 will be played, but I'm very skeptical it's going to work for white. And that's kind of why I wanted my knight here, so that I could take with the knight, and instead of taking with a pawn, which will allow white's h-pawn to run, take with the knight, but I have faith in my defensive position. I think I'm going to be doing all right there. So let's play the knight back. If bishop here, I'll probably just continue with my queenside attack. I don't know that I really even need to defend this. Again, knight f6, bishop takes c5. I would prefer that the d file stay closed. I don't want white getting any sort of counterplay that way. So I think bishop f3, I'll just say, go ahead, take the h5 pawn. You're still many, many moves away from landing something against my king. Bishop h6, something like that is not going to work here. Bishop g5, probably just knight f6. Don't take and allow white to take with the h-pawn and get the rook involved. And speaking of how I'm going to play... Okay, so g4. So white, I think, recognizes the urgency of the situation. Okay, options. So I could push and then maybe go after this pawn. I could play queen a5 if I want. I could just take once, which may be like my default decision here. Take once, although then white is presumably going to play h5 and start pushing. Yeah, interesting. Knight f6. Knight f6 again, there's bishop takes c5 issues potentially. Could also just take here. I mean, that may be the best way to play this, actually. Take there, rook b8, and try to hammer the b2 pawn. If I want to open lines, maybe that's just the way I should go here. Do I care if white plays g5? I think even there I can keep stuff closed. I'm going to take. So target is now this pawn. Rook b8, queen b6. And if white plays g5, I may play queen b6 first, so that if f6, I can move the bishop back to d8. Keep lines closed. Very interesting. It does feel a little ridiculous to be confident when you have a knight on h8, but instinctually, this I still have a lot of faith in my position. Okay, h6 could be coming, but I feel like my attack at this point is perhaps a bit more imminent. So rook b8 or queen b6, I don't know that it really matters at this stage. Both moves are kind of part of my plan, so let's play rook b8, just to keep the queen and the bishop trained against this h-pawn for now. Also maybe a little more subtle. If I bring the queen here, I think it's pretty obvious I'm going for this. I mean, rook b8, it's also fairly obvious, but white maybe is more inclined to play something like h6. And this pawn is defended, remember, so knight takes a4, never really possible for white as a defense of the b2 pawn. Okay, rook over. So what is white planning there? Knight d1? Or is white just going to run with their king? Is that how it's shaping up? Well, I'm going to let white answer that question because it seems like it's a tougher call for them than me. Okay, knight d1. Now I was thinking a3. a3 looks pretty nice. White can't take it. I get mated. So a3 I threaten to take. I also threaten to push. No immediate threat against my king. Let's do it. I'm expecting b3, I guess. The idea a2, king b2. And white's barely defending over there, although it looks kind of grim. b3 would be nice to play c4, but I can't do that. My queen's hanging. I could play a5, a4. It's a little bit slow. I could play queen b4 maybe. Don't know. Queen trade's probably good for me, actually. So that'd probably be all right. Yeah, white does play b3. Yeah, queen b4 seems decent here. I'd like to make a2, king b2 work. Bishop a4 also comes to mind, trying to just knock down the doors, basically. But bishop a4, maybe queen c3. Trying to use this knight seems a little slow. So if I play queen b4 and we get a queen trade, is there anything white can do to hurt me over here? I really still believe my position's just inherently solid if that happens. So let's play this move. And one reason I like this, not only does it help defend the a-pawn and threaten a queen trade, if white blocks on c3 with a knight, I can play c4. I can get that move in immediately and try to further attack white's king. And I kind of get the sense that that's what white's going to do. Like knight here. Yep. Okay, the only other thing I'm going to check is if a2 merits consideration, but this is the move I'm really liking here. a2, knight takes, queen a3 check, king b1. c4 looks pretty good there too, although there's b4 perhaps. There's also a2 king here still. I think I'm going to push this guy. Yeah. I'll let white blockade with the knight if they want. I still get my queen trade. I can take on b3. I should be up 2 pawns with a winning position there. So 2.5 minutes left. Better to just play the straightforward move. If h6, I can just ignore it. I can just take. If h7 check, take with the king. Should be fine. If h6 takes, take g7. Looking to see if I can somehow mate white. I don't think I'm mating right away. So that maybe is something I have to be aware of. Like knight takes, bishop h6. Okay, white goes back. Yeah, now I think I'm pretty happy to trade and take b3. White's queen side is collapsing. The pawns that I'll be up will be doubled, but that a3 pawn and the fact that white's king is totally stripped of defenders is pretty significant. Do I have to worry about this again? Nah, I think I can always just play king h7, especially at this stage. So let's take. Idea h6 king here. Pawn takes, knight takes. White's h-pawn kind of gets in white's way. My knight on h8 is still a spectator for now, but it can work its way back into the game later. Game is definitely not over, but it feels like at this point I have a significant, most likely decisive advantage if I play it correctly. I know these pieces don't look too impressive, but they're going to get in the game pretty fast. And white is just also has some scattered pieces right now that aren't operating to their maximum, but white's down 2 pawns without a whole lot to target. So yeah, h6 comes. This pawn break. King h7 was the move I said I liked here. Don't see any way I can really hurt white's king at the moment. King h7 just makes sense on a lot of levels. Just ensure that after takes, and this bishop moves that I don't run into any problems with the pin on the g file. No f6 to worry about. I've got that covered. Got to look at a move like f6, though, because you got 2 minor pieces in forking distance of the pawn. Yep, h5. So white pushing with this pawn. Now I'm thinking about getting this guy involved. And actually, I can check here if I want. Could also just play rook b8. Although the check is pretty darn tempting. Force white to pin one of their pieces. Probably white will put this knight here if I do that. Could also play rook b2, maybe just lock in the king a little bit further. I wish my knights were ready to jump into the fray. Ooh, I see some cool ideas. I think I'm going to give check. Now, if this knight blocks, his knight takes f5 good. Probably unnecessary. I don't think I have to play that. But let's just see which way white blocks. I could just try to put pressure on this knight in some way. Like bishop d8 to a5. Feels like there should be some more decisive way to play, though. Yeah, knight c3. I was liking the idea of this initially. Take, bishop takes with the threat of rook b1. But white can slip away with king d1. Don't think I should allow that. I was also thinking of bishop g5 deflection type moves. Maybe bishop b5 now. Maybe I can snake in like this, or maybe here too. This threatens rook takes a2. That looks pretty good. Yeah, let's play that. King's gonna run, okay. Okay, thinking about bishop b5. Bishop b5 to here, perhaps. There's a bishop c1 move white could perhaps play. Doesn't really seem to lead anywhere, though. Yeah, I like bishop b5. Getting a little low on time, so let's play it. If h6, I'll just move here. Still got to be kind of aware that there's nothing that can happen on the h and g files because the rooks are lined up. But with the h pawn in the way, I mean, the one thing I do have to worry about is like a rook landing on g7, take, and somehow white coming in and punishing me. But I logistically am very doubtful that that would work for white. Okay, so white's going to bail with the king. So let's just play bishop c4. Attack this guy. If knight c1, I can play a2, and white's going to have to sack a piece. Could also keep a2 in reserve. It's kind of nice to keep in reserve because that knight is totally corralled on c1. Corralled by my bishop, so I can maybe just increase the tension. Something like bishop here to here. But a2 is simple. a2 wins a piece. Maybe f6 and followed by bishop h3 is one thing I should have been looking at a bit. I'm just noticing that that maybe was an option for white. Some sort of h5 move thrown in somewhere. I mean, I have the time to prevent that if I want. Seems exceedingly cautious to even want to prevent that, but I have, like I said, I have the time to do it if I want. Ooh, I can also take here. Take and bishop g5 check is interesting. I'm going to do this, though. I just seeing this now, I'm a little bit worried that that would give white some counterplay. So, okay, he plays the bishop back to f1. And now probably just push this. Force white to sack this. Probably what I'll take here. Let's play rook a8. I'm going to go here next, I think. Try for this. If bishop c1, I have this, so rook there is definitely a threat now. Yeah, let's play here. Still a bit up in the air because, again, my knight on h8 is remaining out of the game for now, so it's not like I can easily make use of my extra piece for the moment. White does have one pawn for it, too, it must be said. Bishop c4. Okay, I can't take... Could play here. Let's do that. Okay, I'm going to take that. And now let's check. Start trying to figure out how I'm going to make use of this extra piece, eh? Thinking about first getting the rook involved somehow. Like, let's go here first. Because if rook b1, I can trade, and if white takes with the rook, I can... I can't even take on h5, though, because he has rook h1 at the end of that line. That's annoying. There's still, like, some small logistical problems. Rook a1. Okay, but now I can double up. And now if rook here, this rook here, I should be able to take here. Or bishop g5. Ooh. Yeah, let's play bishop g5. White is pinned multiple ways here. Okay, can take e4 check, but then king f3. Can take here. Let's do that. Rook h1, king to h6. Okay. Can take e4 check. Yeah, I think that's simple. Okay, he resigned. Yeah, you know, it got a little weird at the end. I don't think my conversion was the best. Bishop f6. This feels like a bad move, but like I said, I started seeing some potential problems if this happens, and then bishop h3 hitting the rook, maybe in conjunction with h6 and bishop f5. Although, now that I think about it more rationally, if that were to happen, I think I could always put a knight on g6. But interesting stuff. Okay, so just the raw stats in this game. First of all, thanks for the game, Maxpayne777. I will definitely send Max Payne the link to this game. It was an interesting one for sure. The link to this analysis, that is. Let's click over to the analysis board. And I'm going to do my usual where I try to draw some conclusions before adding in the engine first. So d4, white plays d6. Very flexible system. You know, a lot of King's Indian players play d6 on move 1 if they want to try to offer to go into a Pierce directly if white plays e4, as my opponent did in this game. But also sometimes d4 players will make a concession because a lot of times white plays knight f3 here to stop e5, and then black may play knight f6, g6, bishop g7, and it rules out certain systems like the Samish variation. So if white plays a system against the King's Indian where they don't put the knight on f3, then they may be unhappy getting move ordered like this. So something to consider if you play the King's Indian defense or just want a way to add some spice into your anti-d4 repertoire. But white played e4, I played knight f6, and then f3. Yeah, and I haven't really faced this too much. So I was more or less out of my book knowledge. I mean, g6 is perfectly fine too. But I wasn't super keen to play a Samish variation, which this could transpose into. So I thought, okay, let's play e5. And then white played knight e2, and yeah, more options for black. Like knight bd7 is probably one of the more flexible moves. g6. Probably if I'm going to go for the fianchetto, I should play knight bd7 first, just so if takes, white can't easily trade. Because that was possible on the previous move, but I generally think black's fine in these positions. You know, a lot of times, like let's say white goes like this. A lot of times, black will end up putting their king on c7 and or bishop on e6 and then king on c7. Black's doing just fine here. So I wasn't afraid of white taking and trading queens with me. You guys know how much I love those queen trades, right? So no worries there. Yeah, now d5. Now I think this phase of the game is where I could use the help of some King's Indian defense players if you guys are in the comments, or those who like these King's Indian Pierce setups, because knight b8 may be a better move than knight e7. Like knight e7 to g6 looks kind of attractive, but as you saw in the game, like it's actually pretty tough for that knight to do much. That knight was not relevant from an offensive perspective for the rest of the game. It was just sitting on h8 and kind of drawing the fire of white's kingside pawns for a time, especially that f pawn. So knight b8 may be the better move, even though it seems to waste time. Like I could try to put this knight on c5 later. Yeah, play something like this. Let's say white plays c4, like knight bd7, bishop e3, a5. Try to play knight c5, and either fianchetto this bishop or play bishop e7. Let's just say hypothetically something like this. Let's just say g3, castles, bishop g2. You see this sort of thing a lot of times. g6, knight g7, and then play for f5. Maybe put the other knight on f6, or again coming to c5. a5 useful to discourage white from playing b4. So I think if I could do this over again, I'd probably put the knight there. As played, I don't like bishop g5. I feel like this doesn't really gain white much, since, as I said, white doesn't really want to trade the bishop. Certainly not for the knight. They might trade it for black's dark square bishop, but even then, this is white's most important minor piece by virtue of how white has arranged their pawns here, committing them to light squares. So the dark squares are pretty tender for white. So that dark square bishop is pretty high in value, relatively speaking, compared to white's other minor pieces. Yeah, that said, though, I feel like I missed something around here. And this is maybe where I'll put the engine on in a second. But after h4, I think I should have looked at knight h5 a little bit longer. Or at all, really. I think I glossed over knight h5. It's not clear what I'm threatening, actually. I mean, I guess, am I threatening knight takes h4 here? Knight takes h4? I might be. And it also begs the question, what happens if this move? I mean, here too, I might be able to play this because I'd be threatening knight takes f3. Some weird stuff. If rook takes h4, bishop takes g5, that wins for black. Bishop takes h4, of course I take with check. So I will check this part with the engine because I wasn't sure about h6 and then h5. I mean, on the one hand, I stopped white from playing g4 and also from playing h5 and progressing further on the king side, but makes this knight kind of poor, and you could see that white was able to defend this. And I tried to bring the play over to the queen side for a time. So that's definitely one area to check. And this was interesting, playing c5. I feel like this is the correct decision now that I've committed to playing this h5 move. Could also play c6, like I was saying. Like, that's interesting. I'm going to see what the engine has to say about that to try to capture on d5. Yeah, not give white the option of keeping the position closed. So g3, bishop d7. All this looks pretty normal. Now, I was very surprised by castle's queenside. I think this is too risky for white. However, the game was sharp, and I wasn't 100% going to crash through with my attack for a time being. It's possible I even overestimated my attack and my position slightly. I just felt very safe here. I would have especially felt safe if my knight were on f6, because then, as I said, if I could take with the knight, not have to take with the h-pawn and allow this h-pawn to run. But I did not like... So right here, when white played f4, I did not like allowing this. Although in hindsight, take here, even this looks pretty good for me. Although, with this knight here, I'm not sure. Let's say b5, take. It's a close call. If this knight was basically anywhere but h8, I'd be feeling very good about this position. Although, there's even queen d6 I'm noticing now. Try to force a queen trade. So we'll see what the computer says about this. I'm guessing it's going to say that I was correct to go for this and that my evaluation of castle's queenside for white was correct, that it's probably not a good idea for white. But I will be curious. I thought white was going to castle short, and then I was thinking about f5. Maybe this didn't appeal to white, having already moved these pawns. But let's say white takes, I take. There's still a long battle ahead. Knight e4, for instance. I can play knight f6. Try to undermine this. If ever there's a capture on e4, maybe put a piece on g4. But there's a very, very long battle ahead. This made it just a street fight. Who's going to get there first? And notice I'm not taking and helping white open lines. I mean, I didn't really even consider this move. Possibly I should have. But just instinctively, I didn't really want to mess with something like this. Let's say white brings this over. Because yes, I've won an h-pawn, and yes, the knight is supported, but I've wasted valuable time playing on the king side when I really want to be playing on the queen side, and I've allowed white to open lines. Generally, you won't hesitate to sacrifice a pawn, especially a rook pawn, if you're looking for an attack against the enemy's king. So, yeah, g4. And I think g4 was probably a correct decision by white. I think almost anything else is going to be too slow. As I said, if white played bishop f3, I was planning on just letting white take. Maybe just take here, take, rook b8 like I did in the game. Who cares about that h-pawn? It's more important to keep lines open so white can easily put a rook against my king without a pawn in the way. I could take here, but wasn't completely sure. h5. Because I don't want to allow something like this, where if I try to keep the position closed further, I'm going to get squished. h7 check. King here, bishop check. This is a good way to get mated. Definitely don't want something like that happening. So that's where the knight on h8 could hurt me, because if the knight was not on h8, I might be able to just slide over here, king h8, use white's own h-pawn as a blocker. So g4, I think, good move by Max Payne. Whoops, I always do that. The arrow right and the arrow down. are right next to each other, so very easy to hit one over the other. Yeah, so take, rook b8. I'm definitely curious about this moment here. Capturing looks like the most direct move. b4 wins a pawn cleanly, but it's kind of the same issue white's running into over here. Like, yes, you can win this pawn, but you don't get the maximum number of open lines you're looking for. White largely gets to keep the position closed. It's very hard for me to target b2 or really any square around white's king. Guess I might have to go for this, but there's problems with that, like my b4 pawn hanging. So I think capturing here is best. Also thought briefly about queen a5, but it's kind of the same thing. If I play queen a5, what is my next move? If I'm just going to take on a4, then I should take on a4 right away, because I don't think I want to play queen a5 and then b4. White will play knight b1. I mean, I guess I could take with my queen on a4, but don't think it's quite what I'm looking for. Yeah, this phase of the game was pretty critical right here. Again, it really feels like I'm getting there faster. And queen takes b2 is a threat. I thought maybe white would just keep their head down and start pushing here. Allow check here and just try to block with something on c1, but it feels like it should be losing. I mean, even if I have to play this move again and we get something like this, I think black should be winning. And I haven't even moved my a pawn yet. But here I was able to play a3, and I think white played probably the only move. Pawn to b3. And queen b4 seemed fine. Again, I wanted to play c4 further, try to take down white's pawn structure, but not possible because of this. So, and a2 is going to be met by king here. Didn't see a great follow-up to this. Thought maybe this move. What didn't I like about this? Maybe queen here, reinforcing this before trying to gather this pawn, or maybe put the king on a1 to defend. Didn't seem like it was quite working. So I like queen b4, and then c4. Trying to accelerate the pace of play. And yeah, after this I felt very confident, but even this turned out to be harder than I thought. I mean, I'm sure I missed some wins at this stage. Maybe I should maneuver my knight right away. Checking certainly can't be bad, though. Checking is a very normal move here. I guess in hindsight, in this position, it's pretty uncomfortable for white. Maybe this rook b2, bishop b5, bishop c4 thing, although it did eventually win a piece, is just not the best way to convert. Maybe I should just play knight here. Try to stick this knight on f6. That looks pretty nice as well. Yeah, in hindsight, I don't really have to touch the queen side. Queen side's fine. If white ever plays king c2, I can just check. There's some fear when you play too directly here, like rook b2. I'm kind of forcing white's king in the direction it wants to go anyways. I've talked about that before in my videos, like especially when you're checking your opponent's king and you're checking them out of the danger zone in a way. Because yeah, as soon as my bishop left here and after this happened, like now it started dawning on me, hey, maybe my bishop actually was useful here. Like, let's just say at this point, hypothetically, white played f6. And I take. And now what's a good move order? Let's say bishop h3, hitting this rook. And let's just say I move it here. Yeah, I think I'm just seeing ghosts. Like h6, knight moves away, check. Now finally, ironically, this knight can finally get back in the action in a nice way, forced way. It's the only move, knight g6. But a good one. Okay, yeah, that move might have been a little nervy on my part. There's probably other issues too, like bishop here. Maybe I can even throw in a check there at some moment. That's good. White doesn't have a lot of squares for their king. Yeah, that was kind of a time pressure, nervy, almost too safe of a move. White played bishop f1. It's very tough for white. I mean, should just be losing, but surprisingly, even after losing that piece, it's not completely simple again, because my knights, and in particular that knight, are so poorly placed for a while. I didn't see a whole lot white could do differently right around here. Yeah, I guess maybe play the king to a different square, like king c2 or king e3. Although, honestly, even here, there's some logistical problems, like rook b1. I was mentioning rook b1 to stop rook b2. Maybe white saw that after takes, rook takes, I can play knight takes h5, but white can just swing the rook back here, and I'm actually just losing this knight. I can't play to h6 because of this, and I can't go to g6 because of the pawn. I suppose I could take and then play king h6, but this too, not going to be easy to convert. Knight b5, attack this pawn. I got a long ways to go to convert this, if it's even better for me with this knight here. So I am kind of curious how I could have made this easier on myself. At this point, I'm definitely winning. I think as soon as white plays rook a1, it's looking pretty bleak, because rook b2 pin opens up bishop g5, then I think it's way too hard to hold this. It's kind of a cleanup job from here. Let me take one more look at, I'd say, like this position. So I really feel like I should be able to convert this position far easier than I did in the game. You know, also from a practical standpoint, I don't think knight takes f5 is that bad of an idea either. I was mentioning this a couple times. So I was mentioning it right here. If I were to do this, it's pretty attractive because I'm threatening rook b1 mate with the pin on this knight. But in time pressure, I didn't want to mess with king here. And what's the material situation? I do have 3 pawns for the piece and a pretty dangerous a pawn, but I didn't see a death blow here. And again, with the knight out of bounds, probably good I didn't go for this. But I gotta believe that there's just some much easier way to play this. I played rook b2 in the game. Yeah, I don't know. Really don't. f6, knight f7 doesn't seem as fast as I would like here. So I will look at the computer at this moment. Okay, so that's a fairly lengthy self-analysis. Let's go back and kind of see what the engine can reveal now. So adding in Stockfish 10. Hopefully you guys can see that. Yeah, so these are the top 3 lines that it's giving. Okay. I generally don't pay too much attention to the engine for the first few moves because there are some openings that the engine just doesn't like, even though they're normal theory. So yeah, here I was debating between knight b8 and knight e7. I don't know that the engine's going to be super revealing on that front. I think this is more of a feel experience thing. As I said, in hindsight, I think knight b8 was probably better. Yeah, bishop e3 I thought was better for white here. I don't think bishop g5 is all that good. Okay, engine wants me to play c6 here right away, but I don't think the way I played this was all that bad. Bishop e7, okay, fine. h4. Yeah, interestingly, I was kind of criticizing that move, but the engine thinks it's all right. I played h6, okay. Yeah, seems fine. Yeah, and here's where I spent this significant amount of time. And knight h5 was my first instinct move. As of now, that's the top move from the engine, but I wasn't seeing a whole lot of ways to follow up. Yeah, just g3. Didn't seem like any sacrifices were going to work here. Like take and take here. It just seemed too easy for white to defend against these threats. And that seems to be the case. That said, though, h5 is not in the top 3 suggestions of the engine here. Still likes knight h5. Knight h5, g3, just castle. Okay, maybe this h4 idea with bishop g5 is better than I gave it credit for. Oh, and by the way, the tactic I was mentioning in-game, if white plays knight c3, very important to know, knight takes d5. This is similar to in the French defense, white playing bishop b5 in the advanced variation, with black having a bishop on d7 and black playing knight takes e5. And then bishop takes d7, check, knight takes d7. So you get a battery here, and if white takes, you move the knight back and you save the knight. You win a very valuable pawn. So watch out for that tactic. Okay, interesting though. Yeah, the computer's still giving white an edge. Doesn't seem to really like this plan. Then again, though, in a lot of these structures I've noticed, I mean, if you analyze the main line of the King's Indian defense with the engine, it's well known that the engines don't like that setup for black. So I don't think it trusts the space disadvantage that black is under. And here I played c5. I was also mentioning maybe c6. c6 might be a bit more dynamic because, like I said, I didn't fear this with this pawn being reinforced. So maybe having the option of taking on d5 is just better. Yeah, if white castles and we get a position like this looks a lot like a Sicilian. Although, again, I feel like this knight on g6 is going to be misplaced. I guess I can maybe try to take this pawn at some point, but solid advantage for white in this line. Okay, still though, I don't think anything super duper interesting or game-changing has happened yet. So white played g3, I went bishop to d7. Here, I just castled. Bishop g2. Okay, knight back to e8. Yeah, okay, so this is one moment I pegged in my little self-analysis a moment ago where I was going to see if the computer also agreed that castle's queenside was too risky. So computer's top moves here, b3, knight d1, and castle's short. So what does it think about castle's long? Okay. Castle's long, and yeah, the evals start going in black's direction, at least these top two moves. So that seems to at least confirm for now my suspicion that castling queenside just wasn't the best thing to do for white. So if castle's here, I was thinking about just playing f5. Yeah, take, knight e4. This is the line I was mentioning. Again, the computer prefers white. Pretty big advantage, but I would certainly play this position. I wouldn't feel that bad about it yet for black. Maybe the computer's skeptical of like the e6 weakness. Looks playable though, certainly. But, okay, castle's queenside. And now I played a6, which I think the engine said was fine. a6. And white went ahead and did this. Okay, and now I went for just b5 right away here. The computer actually does say this move. Oh, yeah, and maybe one move I should have considered was bishop g4. I don't know why I didn't really look at that move seriously, because I knew g4 was weak, but I think I was fixated on my bishop assisting the b5 push. But yeah, if I really wanted to stop white's pawn storm, I could play this move. f5, knight h8 again. And then there's no chance that white's going to do this. Also, this is clearly still not working because I've got d6 guarded a couple times, among other things. So, yeah, bishop g4 is interesting. I still don't really like the look of this line. Just instinctively capturing this way doesn't feel right to me, although the computer places that up there too. And I think I'm okay with that. That feels like a computer sort of non-judgmental capture, whereas a human, to me, this just appears to help white's attack against my king. So I'm going to acknowledge that the computer might be right about that, but I like what I did. Just kept my head down, played b5. f5, knight goes to h8, and now g4. Yeah, I'm just looking at this other line. Computer thinks bishop f3 is a good option for white. And I probably would have taken here and just allowed this and then rook b8. Okay, computer's skeptical of this. Bishop f3, just very nonchalant. So if I do this, queen e1, wow. Evidently the engine doesn't think too highly of black's position if this occurs. That's very computerific. Just take the b2 pawn with check. I'm just going to move my queen out of the way, and my king's going to be nice and snug on d2. Maybe I'll play rook b1 if I get bored. Engine says this is +2 for white. That would be an impressive line. Not too many people are going to give up that pawn with check and like play a move like queen e1 to preface it. Even though white did give up the b2 pawn in the game, they were going for something more direct against my king. It's okay, white played g4. Yeah, and I took on a4. Okay, interesting. Computer really does not like that decision. Yeah, I was hesitant to take because I didn't want this h5, h6, h7 idea to crop up, but okay. So the engine says I can play king h7 here, and I'm guessing if h6, just now play g6 and use my king to block the pawn from reaching h7. Okay. Yeah, that was a possible defense, wasn't it? Okay. So when I take here and we get this going, man, the engine's so unforgiving. I was pretty confident, but you can see the numbers here. Probably kind of small on your screen, especially if you're watching on a smartphone or something. But yeah, we're getting into +2 territory now for white. So white played rook here. I really felt like I was getting there first in this position, but maybe not the case. Okay, rook here, one of the top moves. Queen b6. Yeah, that's impressive. Computer says just play h6, let black take here, and it's all good. King d1. Wow. Very complicated, but white better. White is better here, apparently. Yeah, if I check, white can always block on c1, like knight c1. And it is true that white's king is safe. I guess I don't have time to run my a-pawn. I probably would play something like this, knowing myself. Take, knight takes. Bishop f3, and white's going to run this pawn. Yeah, and again, to a human eye here, this still looks very complicated. But I guess I could see how the engine thinks this is winning. I don't know. I guess I'll pose that as a question to you guys. What do you think about some of these lines I'm showing where outwardly it seems to me that black is crashing through first, but the computer is just undisturbed? Do you think that sort of feedback is extremely helpful for a human player, or is it something you look at, you acknowledge it, but say, okay, I'm not a computer and neither was my opponent? So I'd be curious what your guys' take is on that. Because white defended in a pretty human way, I'd say. Knight d1, not allowing that pawn to hang with check. But now I get an a3. Even here, the computer thinks this is okay, actually. It says queen c3 is playable. Queen c3, just let black take. Let black play a2 if they want. You got everything under control. a2, queen a3. I mean, one thing I guess I'm taking away from this is that when my activity dies out, the weakness and the passivity of my pieces, really the passivity of my pieces, and again, I'm going to mention it for like the 50th time, this knight on h8, that could come to tell. Even though white's pieces aren't yet all that impressively placed as well. Like white has some issues like the knight on d1, but I guess technically, at best, I'm attacking with these three highlighted pieces in the a-pawn, but when that fizzles out, I'm starting to see how this attack may not come to fruition, even if I win a pawn or something. And maybe that's why the game continuation still felt tough to win. Yeah, like even here, queen b4. White says, or the computer says, if white plays king b1, white's in very good shape. c4, probably something I would do. Just take. King a2. Take. Yeah. And these pieces, again, still up a pawn, but that pawn may be lost in the future, and these pieces are so poorly placed. I should even include the rook here. I don't know why I'm not including the rook, because if the knight is standing on e8, the rook certainly can't get in the game. Okay. You know, I've sometimes noticed that about my play. Like, I sometimes play too optimistically when I'm attacking, and I'll make judgments about a position thinking I have the initiative, but maybe not considering the ramifications of the position when it fizzles out. I have noticed that about my position, about my play sometimes. Yeah, so on queen b4, it does look like a very good idea for white to play king b1 here. Interesting. Because during the game, I bet neither of us were really seriously considering that. I don't recall considering king b1 here. It just looks counterintuitive to go right back towards the direction where you were just getting attacked. But yeah, if that king gets up to a2, I could easily see there not being an attack here. Okay, but on knight c3, now c4. Okay, now we're firmly in the black here. Now it does start to get tough. And here white should play h6 and make it messy again. But seems to be working out in my favor again. Yeah, king h7 or g6. Instead, white played knight a2, stopping my pawn. But okay, so this gets into the next phase where I was curious how I was best off converting. Okay, h6. I think I'm all right with king h7 here. g6 is another option, but king h7 looks fine to me. Yeah, take. h5. I gave this check. Okay. I think the check is totally normal. I was also debating rook b8, although it was not clear that rook b8 really threatened much. So check is fine. Okay, what to do here? I'm up 2 pawns, but they are doubled. I played rook b2 in the game, but that led to him running. I was speculating maybe knight e8. Try to put the knight on f6 was better. Bishop d8, I think, is a move I mentioned in the game. Bishop a4. Ah, bishop a4 is interesting. Yeah, I didn't consider that. That's kind of clever. So bishop a4 so that if the king ever runs here, I can take with the discovery on the king. Okay, and what's the threat? Just come down to b2? Yeah, if white plays some passing move, come here. Threaten rook c2 check. Also rook takes a2 as well. Ooh, yeah, that's nasty. It's kind of a tough move to find, though, especially in time pressure. And I bet this confirms my suspicion when I was analyzing some of the other lines that f6 like really doesn't amount to anything. Let's just explore this for a second. Take, bishop h3. Yeah, let's just say black plays here. h6, just move the knight. Yeah, and bishop h5 can always be met by knight g6. Yeah. Okay, so the f6 stuff probably seeing ghosts. Maybe white can change the move order. Maybe play bishop h3 first. That may be a better way to implement it. Yeah, because then white would be threatening f6 and bishop f5 check. Wait, how would this be different? Rook c7. Guess it wouldn't be that different. Because if ever h6 is pushed, I just move the knight. And if this happens, my knight is still controlling f5. So I don't see how that is hugely different. Yeah, on the whole, I think that f6, bishop h3 operation is something that just is not going to work for white. Okay, so I played rook b2 in the game. White played king d1. Just curious if at any moment here, white had a chance. So we were in mutual time pressure at this point. Here I got fancy and decided not to play a2 again. I was trying to shut down f6, but I think it is pretty dominating still, so that seems to be all right. So I'm up a piece here, piece for a pawn. And I elect to try and trade these light square bishops. Yeah, taking in king d3 still looks winning, though, for black. And let me see this final decision. Yeah, king c2, I would say, is probably the better option here for white. Just to try to control the b2 square and prevent me from pinning this knight. Yeah, here I was speculating that maybe rook b1 has to be played. Rook b1, and if we get a trade, this pawn should not be captured because of rook h1. Yeah, I think this still would have given me some work to do because I have to be careful that this doesn't drop and need to get my pieces coordinated. Looks like I can play bishop d8 here. So what's the idea if this bishop a5 go on the attack? Okay. Not an easy maneuver to see, though. I guess I'm threatening to take and maybe take here. Okay, so it does seem like I had this pretty well under control. after I won the knight on a2. Forced white to sacrifice. Yeah, and I think this was pretty much just winning. Very interesting, though. I know this turned out to be a long video. Looks like an hour, 20 minutes. So thanks to those of you who stuck around and watched this whole thing. But this is the sort of self-analysis, guys, that I really believe if you want to take your game to the next level, like, you got to do this stuff. And nobody can do it for you. Like, you have to ask yourself these questions, like, what were the major turning points in the game? Especially tactically. You know, where tactically did the game turn? Try to draw those initial conclusions like I did, then add the engine in later. And you can see I'm playing down quite a bit in rating in this game, but I feel like I learned a lot in this one. And this maybe revealed some weaknesses that I have in my game, like overestimating the attack and my evaluations of certain positions. Some of them were accurate, like definitely it seems like I was correct that castles queenside should not be good for white, but it seems like my play hereafter was, if anything, too straightforward, and maybe I should have actually played a bit on the king side. Usually in these opposite side castling situations, you should more or less continue attacking, but I think here I did that too directly. Also, I'd love to hear any feedback you guys have in the beginning part of the game if anyone plays this system. So, very interesting stuff, guys. Again, appreciate it if you watched this whole thing. If not, no worries. Hopefully it was still entertaining. And I'm going to be taking a trip out of town starting Thursday. I'll be gone Thursday through Sunday, but I'll see if I can get another video out or two in the meantime. So thanks, guys, and I'll be back again soon with another video. Bye.